I had known my best friend's mom for years, but never thought much beyond polite greetings and casual conversations. She was always kind to me, the sort of person who treated her son's friends like her own, offering a glass of water when we came in from a heat or asking if we wanted snacks during study sessions. She carried herself with an ease that made everyone around her feel welcome, and even though she was older, there was a natural warmth and energy in her that never seemed to fade. One ordinary afternoon, I found myself outside their house when I noticed her struggling with her car. She was turning the key over and over again, but the engine refused to start. I walked closer, asked if she needed a hand, and she smiled, half embarrassed, half relieved. Her son wasn't around, and she admitted she didn't know much about cars. I decided to take a quick look. I wasn't a professional mechanic, but I knew enough to figure out basic problems. After a few minutes of checking under the hood, I realized the battery connection was loose. With a bit of adjusting and tightening, I got the car running again. She clapped her hands in relief, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You've just saved me a big headache," she said with a laugh, clearly surprised that I managed to fix it so quickly. I shrugged it off, trying to play it cool, but inside I felt good. There was something about being able to help her that gave me a quiet sense of pride. What stood out most wasn't the car, though. It was the way she looked at me afterward. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, just a gentle acknowledgement, a kind of respect that made me feel seen in a different way than before. She thanked me several times, insisting she owed me one. I told her it was nothing, but she kept smiling, and finally, as if the thought had just crossed her mind, she said, "You know, if you're free this weekend, come over. I could use some more help around the house if you're interested." Her words caught me off guard. She said them casually, but the invitation echoed in my mind longer than it should have. I nodded without hesitation, but as I walked home later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of spending time with her outside of the usual setting was different, unfamiliar, and oddly exciting. She wasn't just someone's mom in that moment. She was a person who had trusted me, who wanted my company, and who saw me as capable enough to be around when she needed help. That night, the thought played over and over again in my head. It wasn't just the fixing of the car, it was the little exchange afterward. The way she laughed lightly when the engine finally started, the way her shoulders relaxed with relief, and the way she lingered a second longer as she thanked me. It wasn't flirtation, it wasn't bold, but there was a softness in the air that I couldn't ignore. For the first time, I realized that what I had with her wasn't just a casual family connection through my best friend. It was something else, something subtle, unspoken, but undeniably present. By the time the weekend drew closer, I found myself oddly nervous. It wasn't the kind of nervousness I felt before exams or job interviews. It was a quieter, more personal anticipation. I kept wondering what she might ask me to do, what kind of conversations we might have, and why she had specifically asked me instead of waiting for her son. It felt like a small door had opened, one that neither of us had planned, but now that it was there, I wanted to see what lay behind it. The weekend came sooner than I expected, and although I tried to act casual, I could feel the anticipation building inside me. When I finally arrived, it was her who greeted me at the door. My best friend wasn't around. He had gone out with some friends, and it was just the two of us. She welcomed me in with an easy smile, not the slightest trace of hesitation, as if she had been expecting me all along. There was something different in the way she spoke that day, not dramatic but more personal, as though she was letting me into a part of her world she usually kept reserved. She guided me toward a few tasks around the house. First, she mentioned the light bulb in the hallway that kept flickering and asked if I could take a look. It was a small thing, but she watched with interest as I fixed it, joking lightly that I seemed to know everything. I laughed it off, but inside, I enjoyed the way she noticed the little efforts. Afterward, she asked if I could help her carry in a few bags of groceries from the car. It wasn't much, but every time our eyes met, I could feel the atmosphere growing softer, more comfortable. As the work slowly shifted into simple conversation, the bond between us began to feel more real. She asked me about my studies, about what I wanted to do in life, and I was surprised at how attentively she listened. Most people nodded along when I spoke, but she asked thoughtful questions, the kind that showed genuine interest. I found myself opening up more than I usually did, telling her about my hopes and the uncertainty I often carried with me. She didn't dismiss any of it. Instead, she encouraged me, saying that being uncertain didn't mean being lost, it just meant I was still shaping my path. Her words lingered with me, soothing in a way I hadn't expected. The conversation shifted toward her own life. She spoke honestly about the challenges she faced raising her son on her own, about the times she struggled to balance everything, and how she had learned to keep moving forward regardless. Her voice carried strength, but also moments of vulnerability that made her more human than the version I had known all these years. She wasn't just my best friend's mom anymore. She was a woman who had lived, endured, and grown. Listening to her felt like uncovering a story that had always been there but never told. There were moments when silence settled between us, but it didn't feel heavy or awkward. It felt natural, as if even the quiet had something to say. A simple glance across the table carried meaning, and the way she smiled when I caught her eyes made me feel seen in a way that I hadn't before. Nothing was rushed, nothing was forced, yet beneath every word and every pause, there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. When the afternoon stretched on, she offered tea, and we sat together, sipping slowly as though neither of us was in a hurry. She asked me questions about friendships, relationships, and what I thought made people stay together. I answered as honestly as I could, and she nodded thoughtfully, sharing her own reflections. Her voice carried both wisdom and tenderness, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't just enjoying her company out of courtesy. I wanted to be there. By the time the sun began to dip, I understood that what was happening wasn't ordinary. This wasn't just a weekend errand or a casual visit to help someone out. It was the beginning of something undefined, but undeniably important. I had come over thinking it was about fixing things in her house, but what I found instead was a connection that felt deeper than I had imagined. Walking out later that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that the time we spent together had quietly shifted something inside both of us. The following days moved along as usual, but I noticed that the memory of that weekend stayed with me more vividly than I expected. It wasn't only about the tasks I helped her with or the conversations we shared. It was the way she carried herself when speaking about her life, the sincerity in her voice, and the way she looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and quiet appreciation. That sense of closeness pulled me back toward her, and before long I found myself spending more time around her house. Sometimes it was with my best friend, sometimes just briefly when I stopped by to see if she needed anything. Each time we spoke, the comfort between us grew stronger, almost as though we had known each other longer than we actually had. One afternoon, she invited me to sit with her outside, and as the soft air drifted through, our conversation grew more personal than ever. She told me about her younger days, how she once imagined her life unfolding in a completely different way, and how time had a way of teaching lessons she had never expected. There was a quiet vulnerability in the way she shared, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she trusted me enough to let me see that side of her. I listened carefully, and for once I didn't feel the need to impress or pretend. I simply wanted to understand her better, to know the person behind the role I had always seen. She asked me about my own experiences, whether I had ever been in love, what I thought about relationships lasting or failing, and I answered as honestly as I could. I admitted that I had always imagined love as something simple, but I was learning that it was often far more complicated than it seemed. She smiled at my words, her eyes reflecting both amusement and agreement. That smile lingered longer than usual, and in that pause, I sensed that she valued my perspective, even if it came from someone younger. The hours slipped by without either of us noticing, and the more we talked, the more natural it felt to share thoughts we wouldn't normally express. I began to realize that this wasn't just a passing connection. It was as though we were building an unspoken trust, layer by layer, in moments that didn't need grand gestures or declarations. There was no rush, no need to name what was happening. It was enough to simply be there, to feel that quiet bond forming without either of us forcing it into words. When she spoke about how she hadn't let herself grow close to anyone in years because of responsibilities and the fear of being hurt again, I could sense how deeply it mattered for her to admit it. I didn't try to offer answers or promises. Instead, I reminded her that strength didn't always mean carrying everything alone. Sometimes it meant allowing someone else to simply be present. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, but I knew it carried gratitude. As the evening drew near, a calm silence settled between us, the kind that doesn't demand to be broken. In that silence, I understood that what we were sharing went beyond words. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It wasn't rushed affection. It was something softer and more genuine, a gentle bond that had grown naturally out of small moments of honesty and kindness. When I finally stood to leave, she told me I was always welcome, not just for help, but for company. That simple sentence held more meaning than anything else she had said before, and as I walked away, I carried with me the certainty that something important had quietly begun between us. In the weeks that followed, our connection only deepened, though it happened in a quiet and steady way rather than through any dramatic change. Sometimes I would stop by when my best friend was around, and we would all sit together casually. Other times, I found myself there when he was away, and it would just be the two of us. On the surface, it looked like nothing unusual, just me helping out with errands or keeping her company for tea, but underneath those ordinary interactions, I felt something far more meaningful growing. It wasn't just kindness exchanged between two people. It was the beginning of trust, a bond that didn't need to be spoken out loud to be understood. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much respect I carried for the way she lived her life. She had handled hardships, raised her son, and managed her responsibilities without ever asking for recognition. Yet when she shared her thoughts with me, I saw not only her strength, but also her humanity. There were moments when she laughed like she was 20 again, carefree and light, and other moments when her voice carried the weight of all she had been through. Each time, I found myself drawn closer, not because of anything I could gain, but because I genuinely valued the person she was. We never crossed lines or rushed into anything that would make either of us uncomfortable. What we had was unspoken but real, a connection built on respect, and the understanding that sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin without definition. She never treated me like a boy from her son's circle anymore. She looked at me as someone she could rely on, someone whose presence brought her a sense of ease. That realization alone changed the way I saw myself. I began to understand that affection isn't always about bold gestures or declarations. Sometimes it is about showing up, listening, and being present in a way that most people overlook. One evening, as I was preparing to leave after helping her with a few small things, she paused before saying goodbye. Her voice was gentle when she told me that life has a strange way of surprising us, that sometimes people enter your path when you least expect them, and their presence ends up changing your outlook in ways you couldn't have imagined. I knew she wasn't speaking casually. Her words carried a depth that left me standing there quietly, realizing that whatever we had was something she acknowledged too. I didn't try to label what was happening. Instead, I accepted it for what it was, a growing closeness that brought us both a sense of calm and hope. As I walked home that night, I thought about how unusual it was that everything had started with something as simple as fixing her car. A small favor had turned into afternoons of laughter, evenings of conversation, and a connection that neither of us had expected. It reminded me that relationships often don't begin with big plans or clear intentions. Sometimes they grow out of ordinary moments that suddenly take on new meaning. Looking back, I realized I didn't need to rush ahead or imagine an ending before it even began. What mattered was the present, the fact that we had found comfort in each other's company and that it felt right to keep it that way. There was no pressure, no promises, only the steady assurance that what we had was genuine. In a world where people often chase after quick excitement, what we shared felt rare. It was built on patience, on honesty, on the willingness to let something unfold naturally. The more I thought about it, the more grateful I felt. She had given me a perspective I didn't have before, teaching me without trying that real connections don't need to be forced. They simply reveal themselves when the timing is right. As I reflected on everything, I couldn't help but smile at the thought that maybe the most meaningful parts of life arrive when you aren't even looking for them. And so I carried forward with a quiet promise to myself that whatever came next, I would embrace it with the same respect and sincerity.